It's not a capitalist model. It should be called a state capitalist model.
I saw this in your reading. What do you mean exactly by state capitalism?
The advanced economy relies very heavily on the state sector. And in fact, if you look through economic history, the developed countries, currently rich countries, first England, then US, then the rest, always had a very powerful state that intervened dramatically in the market to the benefit of the merchants, manufacturers, industrialists, and so on. So, for example, during its huge growth period in the 19th century, the U.S. had far and away the highest tariffs in the world, and it, in fact, remained that way until the mid-20th century, when the U.S. was so much in advance of every other country that it was willing to tolerate market exchanges in which it would win. But that stops too. So when the U.S. started, manufacturing started falling behind Japan, Ronald Reagan practically doubled protectionist barriers. And that's only the little piece of it. I mean, that's a piece that economists often study. But if you look at the modern economy is based very extensively on state-organized and directed R&D, subsidy, procurement, bailout, the information technology revolution is an example, computers and the internet, biotechnology. It always has a substantial state component, huge in fact.
And the fact that we overlook this state capitalism dimension, it's what you call precisely one of the mythologies of modern times.
It's part of the mythology. And it's kind of interesting to see it now. There's a lot of wailing about how the government is intervening in the financial industry. What has it done all along?
Yes.
I mean,
but precisely, I mean, what do we gain in creating such a mythology? Why do we want to overlook the importance, the centrality of the state, especially in the American context?
There's good propaganda reason. I mean, the doctrinal system is mostly business run, public relations system and so on. And they want people to oppose state intervention for the benefit of the public. So they would like to have benefits cut, for example. And they don't want the state to interfere with managerial prerogatives, compensation, for example, right now. But they're very happy to let the public basically be a cash cow. They just want that part concealed. So the picture that comes out is that we have a system of entrepreneurial initiative, consumer choice, and so on. I remember about 10 years ago, I read a speech by Alan Greenspan to the newspaper publishers extolling the magnificence of our free enterprise system. He did something that most people don't do who talk about this. He gave examples. Every example that he gave was a textbook example of research and development and procurement inside the state sector, which often for a long period, and computers and the internet were pretty much in the state sector for decades before you could make profit out of them. But it's kind of, it escapes people's minds. And others are not, sometimes it's almost comical. Like if you look at the World Trade Organization, there are constant legal battles going on between Europe and the United States over civilian aircraft production. There's actually two major civilian aircraft producers in the world, Airbus and Boeing, and they're debating technical debates about which one is getting a bigger government subsidy. I mean, Airbus gets it directly, the United States gets it through the Air Force and aerospace and so on, but they're kind of offshoots of the state sector.
So historically you are telling us that in fact the centrality of the state has been concealed, but
it's self-concealed in a way.
Self-concealed?
I mean, if you brought it forth, it would undercut the argument that we have to cut benefits for people.
But precisely in the current situation, in a way, the whole of the state is really in plain sight. So because
well, right now it
so what does it mean, and what does it tell us?
And it's different because now it happens to be in the financial institutions.
Yes.
And the last 30 years or so, the financial institutions have followed pretty much of a market system, and the results were predictable, and in fact predicted repeated deeper crises. Huge bailouts and so on. That's the way market systems work. But even in the financial sector, which is to some extent approximating a market. The government's intervened crucially.
Yes.
I mean, take the too big to fail policy.
Yeah.
That's a government insurance policy. You know, and it gives perverse incentives. It encourages Citigroup, others to take huge risks, because if they get into trouble, the population will bail them out.
What would have been your choice regarding the bailout of the banks? Do you think that we should have let this bank go down the drain, or do you think that we should have, as it has been the case, help them and bail them out?
There are other possibilities. Like
what would have been other possibilities?
Forget what I would like. I'd let the workforce and the community take them over. But in the existing system, a possibility would be for the government just to buy them. So to buy Citigroup would cost a fraction of what it costs to bail it out.
Yes.
And then, you know, if they didn't want to run it themselves, after they can fix it up, they could give it away to somebody. But that would interfere with managerial prerogatives. In fact, if you look right now, Wall Street is exultant.
Yes.
Because the whole system is being reconstituted with almost no modifications, you know, a couple of days ago they allowed a dozen or so banks to return the TARP money. That's supposed to get them to start to give money back to the public. Yeah, but if you look at the footnotes, it also cuts back their lending, and that was the point of the TARP stimulus. And you know, they quote Wall Street.
How do you explain that we let these banks becoming too big to fail, becoming a systemic risk? And what does it tell us about the relationship between the financial sector and the political sector? In a way, in order for an institution to become a systemic risk, in order for this to be legitimate, this institution would have to deliver a systemic service. So, well, where is the systemic service?
Well, let's go back to the decision.
Yes.
Who made the decision? The decision was made by a political system which is extensively dominated by the financial sector. Actually, Adam Smith had the right comment about this. We're supposed to worship him, but not read him, but he had interesting things to say. If you look at Wealth of Nations, he's discussing England, of course. He says, in England, the principal architects of policy, who are merchants and manufacturers, make sure that their own interests are very peculiarly attended to, taken care of, however grievous the impact on others. And that's perfectly natural. What do you expect them to do? Well, okay, today the principal architects aren't merchants and manufacturers, they're financial institutions who gave most of the funding for the last election and so on. So yeah, they've made the decisions. I mean, there was a shift in the 70s. The first period after the Second World War was so-called Bretton Woods systems designed by John Maynard Keynes and Harry Dexter White, U.S. and Britain. And it was based, among other things, on regulation of capital. So state governments could stop capital export if they wanted. The currencies were more or less regulated. And Keynes and White anticipated that this would lead to rapid growth. And it did, rapid and quite egalitarian growth. They also recognized that this would leave an opening to governments to carry out social democratic programs. I mean, once you financialize the economy, as happened in the 70s, and huge speculative flows and tax on currencies and so on, it creates what economists call a dual constituency for governments. They've got the voters, they've got the financial sector, international financial sector. And the way they vote is if they don't like a government policy, they vote against it by destroying the economy, by capital flight, by a tax on currencies and so on. And in a competition, they win.
But why is it that, I mean, the sense of outrage is not greater than what it is? I mean, why is it that we have more or less accepted the fact that it's okay for these entities to really socialize losses and privatize gains?
Well, why is it that we are... It's always been happening. The high-tech economy, like computers, the internet, and so on, biotechnology, it's based on the principle, extensively, not 100%, but that the public pays the costs and takes the risks, And eventually, which can be after decades, profit is privatized. I mean, computers, for example, they were being developed in the lab where I work back in the 50s. They were completely unmarketable, huge monsters. When they finally got to most under Pentagon contracts, you know, IBM was in there learning how to shift from punch cards to electronic computers and so on. I mean, finally, in the 60s, IBM was able to actually manufacture a computer, but it was too expensive. They couldn't sell it to anyone. So it was the government, the National Security Agency took it. I mean, it wasn't really until about 1980 that they started making profit out of these things. The internet was in the public sector for 30 years, and it runs through the rest of the economy. So what's being done with the financial institutions, public pays the costs and gets profits privatized. Yes, that's the way the system works.
So it's nothing new in a way.
Not fundamentally new.
So, but where is the issue of accountability, the issue of responsibility in all these pathologies which are being generated?
Well, first of all, who's supposed to be accountable? I mean, the people who make Adam Smith's observation is correct. The principal architects of policy they would only be accountable to an organized, active public. But in our modern democratic system, the public has been essentially atomized and marginalized.